Alrighty, well, welcome to Behind the Scenes of AV Rant. This is the live broadcast of our recording session. So, if there are any technical difficulties, you'll see them live as they happen. That's why there is a cleaned up version that gets posted later in the week with at least the audio well cleaned up. And I also put times in the show notes so you can hop around to the questions more easily. That's what you get with the complete version. But you've been warned. You're watching the behind the scenes one if you're seeing this. And I think that's it. Let's see here. Let's put up our fancy graphic because you know what today is. That's what today is. All right. Tom can start when he pleases.
Welcome to another. I screwed it up last week, and I'm screwed up again this week. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And it's not only AV Rant, it is a special episode of AV Rant. It is our 700th episode of AV Rant, and there we go. We've got a little graphic on screen. Pop on over to YouTube. 700 episodes, Tom. It's a milestone. Congratulations.
It's a thing.
It's very much a thing.
Another 100 in the bank. It's just I just got a spam mail from somebody. Said, "Oh, I read your post."
Uh-huh.
Which of course, we don't have posts. We have podcast.
Oh,
episodes.
that thing. Yeah, we always get those spam emails that say that. Yes.
Number 463, and it really aligns well with our content. We would love to have a paid post on your website. Like, no, you want to.
I get oodles of those. Oodles and oodles.
Yeah, it's nonstop. That's why people are like, "How come you didn't read my email?" I don't know. Maybe it got lost in the 700 of those emails I had to go through every day. Plus tactical drones, COVID masks, and the general,
the emails certainly have not stopped. Well, we're starting.
The bots are going strong. Apparently, they're immune to the COVID.
We're starting a little bit later than we could have. For once, Tom was waiting on me, and that's because I didn't get the topic list done as early as I could have because I pretty much spent I stayed up way too late on Sunday watching all of the final season of She-Ra, which was awesome. And I'm still disappointed that more people aren't talking to me about it. And I wish I had someone to talk about it with because I have many thoughts and feelings about the final season.
Well, we could talk about it, but not yet because I'm still on. Is it 4 seasons, right?
Well,
I'm
there's
3.
technically 5, but it was really 4 seasons, 13 episodes each. They split one of the seasons into like 2 and it does 7 and 6 for some weird reason. But anyway, yeah, very good. Catra's arc was awesome, and I have other thoughts, but no one to talk about it with. So that was that. But this is 700. This is our special episode, and we should talk about some home theater and AV probably.
No. I figure we'd do a cooking episode this week.
Could be that.
Nothing but cooking and DIY skateboards.
There are food related comments, so you might have your chance.
I know the whole coffee thing is it's coming. I saw that was on the way. All right, this is AV Rant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you do is ask. You ask by emailing us question@avrant.com. You can go to avrant.com, leave us a comment there. Facebook.com/avrantpodcast. I said Facebook, right? YouTube.com/avrant. Contact Rob directly at rob@avrant.com. His Twitter is @FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter is @avrant_Tom, where I post sporadically and infrequently.
And I will just mention, it's great people are getting in touch with us in all sorts of ways, but if you want your question on the podcast, the easiest way to make sure that happens, question@avrant.com. It is easier for me to organize and search through questions there. Sometimes people split up their questions between email and Twitter or Facebook and Twitter or whatever, and I don't always do a good job of tracking back and forth. So to make my life easier, if you would like to use the email question@avrant.com.
We could, I don't mind people reaching out and contacting us on Facebook and Twitter, but I think all the questions that they want answered on the podcast should have to go through the email. It's not that hard. I think we all have email. I'm fairly certain that if you can tweet us
chances
or
are, if you
Facebook
signed
us,
up for Facebook and Twitter, you likely had an email address. So that's
700
probable.
new rule for 700 questions go through the questions for the podcast. If you want to just hit Rob up or me up directly about something or make a comment, Facebook, Twitter, we'll answer you there. If we decide to put that on the podcast, we decide to put it on the podcast. But if you want your question answered on the podcast, got to go through question@avrant.com. I think that's fair.
Okay.
I feel like that's fair.
I mean,
that will make your life a little bit easier because you're not go through a bunch of stuff.
I'm just going to end up putting the questions on there anyway. But we'll put out
that's
the request.
That's between you and the gods you serve, Rob. I'm not. I do everything I can to make your life easier, including saying that we don't have to answer every single question, and our episodes don't have to be 2 hours long. But this is it. Oh, speaking of long episodes, I was on the Bright Side. What is it called? Bright Side.
Yeah, Bright Side Home Theater Podcast. All right.
Podcast. So that will be coming out later today. If you're listening to this podcast on Friday, when I hopefully remember to post it, I will be there. It's very long. We're supposed to be talking about Jurassic Park. If you love the movie Jurassic Park and you think it is a cinematic masterpiece that has no flaws, I'm sorry for all the things I said.
Tom can be salty. This is a shock to everyone, Tom.
I say it a lot in this spot and on the podcast, but I'm gonna say it a lot. I'll say it again here. I love that movie.
Mm-hmm.
I've owned that movie in almost every format that it's ever come out on, and I will probably continue to own that movie on all the formats it will continue to come out on over the years. It is not a flawless movie, and if you can't see those flaws, then you shouldn't listen to that podcast because you will never be able to watch it again.
I always say the kids are the absolute MVPs of that movie because if you believe that they are terrified, then it helps you to feel terrified, at least for them, if not for yourself. And those kids convince me that they're terrified. And that is what pretty much every other Jurassic Park movie has not had, is convincingly terrified children.
Oh, there's a lot of things that movie is just it's a masterpiece in so many ways, but there are some issues. But it's a very long episode. We just kind of talked for a long time.
All right.
We did a lot of talk about that. We went off topic a lot.
There, you see, I'm not the only one who can make other people's podcasts go extra long. Tom can do it too.
Oh, yeah, I think that. I don't know. DJ, I think, will take a little bit of the blame on that one. But,
all right.
I was definitely wanting that podcast because my kids left the window cracked open, and all the AC in the room was getting sucked outside.
Ah, yes.
And I was sitting in this chair just sweating. It was very uncomfortable. I it's 3. It wasn't 3. It was like midnight or something. I'm like, oh my god, I need to take a shower. All right, this is AV. We already did the AV Rant part, right?
Yep.
So let's thank our listeners of the week. Become a listener of the week. All you do is support the podcast in some way. You can do that by going to avrant.com and click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link. So we want to thank Raphael and Jason for doing exactly that. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Yes, thank you very much. Is it Raphael or Raphael? I don't see an E in there.
Oh.
I'm not sure if it was misspelled or mispronounced. Whatever it is.
That is the spelling. I will double check it right now, but I'm pretty sure that was the spelling.
Somebody named with a name close to Raphael and Jason. Thank you very much for the PayPal donations. It's very much appreciated.
If we call him Raffy, is he going to be mad?
Or just Raph? I'm pretty sure that's Raph. We've had a fellow named Raph who's written to us many times. That's probably Raph.
I would like to be called Raph. I feel like that's a fairly cool name. Like a nickname. Tom. I mean, I'm Tom. It's so boring. Raph feels like exotic and interesting. That is how his name is spelled.
All right.
Yes. All right. So we'll call him Raph. Raph and Jason. Jason. We also want to thank our 112 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon's a service where you sign up to support your creators of choice or content creators of choice monthly. So monthly, some money comes from you and comes to us. So we want to thank our 112 patrons over at patreon.com.
For sure, patreon.com/AVRant Podcast. If you'd like to sign up and get that number ever higher, we very much appreciate our 112 patrons over there. And yeah, it's like a voluntary subscription if you want to think of it that way. $1 per month minimum.
Can't support us financially, we completely understand, especially in times like now where so many people are filing for unemployment. So if you can do something and you do it, let us know what it is so that we can mention you. So we want to thank Ash, who provided our episode 700 artwork, which you will see on our website, as well as it should be the cover art for this episode, as well as on the YouTube video, and it's in the lower third of our YouTube video as well.
Sure
so thank you very much, Ash.
Yes, Ash. That he's been helping us out for years and years and years now. So
since 500,
at least
for sure.
Since 500. That's for darn
Was
sure.
It 400? I don't feel like
might
it
have been even
before.
earlier. I mean, the first time he did like something big and splashy was 500, as I recall it. But I might even be wrong about that. But previous lower thirds, I don't know what it was. Ash has been around for a long time, and we really appreciate it. Thank you, Ash.
We also want to thank Jason, who gave us a shout out to SVS when he bought a pair of Prime Elevation speakers to use at front heights. We had also suggested the Boston Acoustics Soundwear 4.5, but the Prime Elevations got the stamp of approval from his wife, so we went with those. They sound great and were easy to install, and arrived in less than 24 hours. Yeah. So he's very happy with them. I mean, dude, that's pretty fast.
That's pretty cool. Thank you, Jason, and congrats on the purchase.
And then Fred also gave us a shout out to SVS when he bought a SoundPath wireless adapter. And Gary Yakubian wrote back with nothing but nice things to say about us.
Yeah.
So that's nice.
It is nice. Good. It's nice all around. Fred, thank you. And congrats on the purchase.
We got some notes of gratitude from Daryl, Mark, Jonathan, who says cheers with a surround sound beer from Collective Arts Brewing, which not really sure. It'll get you so drunk you hear things in three dimensions. I don't know.
I don't know
how that works.
He says that should be the official beer of our podcast. I don't drink alcohol of any kind, really. So.
I will drink his beer for him.
That's right.
I will be happy to do that. I'm a father of 3, and beer is the lubrication that keeps this family from being murdered quietly in their sleep. So let's start from the beginning. Daryl, Mark, Jonathan, who's the beer guy, Steve, Carl, Rob, Jason, different Jason than before, and Graham. So thank you all.
Indeed. I'll say the names again. Daryl, Mark, Jonathan, Steve, Carl, Rob, Jason, and Graham. Thank you very much. It's really nice to get, really pleasant notes and people saying they're thankful that we're keeping the podcast going. We extend our thanks to all of you. There's no way we make it to 700 episodes without a community behind us. So that's really awesome. And thanks so much for continuing to listen to us.
That's right. And of course, we want to thank Andrew. You all know Andrew is the one that built Rob's super cool TIE Fighter model, as well as provided a model, which I don't even know what it was.
It was
for one of our listeners.
It was an X-Wing.
An X-Wing.
Yep.
X-Wing.
That went to Joseph. He was the winner of our previous draw there. Joseph sent us an image of his X-Wing sitting very nicely beside a Rob the Robot from the original Nintendo Entertainment System. So those two are hanging out.
This week, I just got my Romulan Warbird, which is perched precariously on its little stand right next to me. So if you're looking at the YouTube video, here is my Romulan. I don't know if you can see it. I can't see my image. So
you got to bring it closer to where your face is right now.
I'm trying. It's very hard. There's not a lot of room in the space, and I don't want to drop anything, and I feel like I'm gonna. I don't want to break this thing. That's
no.
It's not, the stand it's a little wobbly on the stand. I don't know if I'm supposed to glue it or not, but it's a lot of little details in here, a lot of little paint here and there to kind of make it. I'm sure it doesn't come out too well on camera, but it's very, very nice. I'm very pleased, and I posted on Facebook, and all of my Facebook friends were like, what is that thing? And my sister-in-law went, "It's a Romulan Warbird, you dummies."
Good for her. Good for her.
Thank you. And her name? Let me put this down. It's going to fall. Hold on. Sorry.
Yep.
Emergency.
Do not crush the Romulan Warbird.
I'm not crushing the Romulan Warbird. It's not crushed. It went cloaked. Her name is Karen. That's right. A Karen got the Romulan Warbird, so there's a plus column for all the Karens out there. There's a win for you.
The only people who aren't Karens are people actually named Karen.
No, I know a couple of Karens that are Karens. So Andrew has once again offered to make a model for one of our listeners as a giveaway, and we've kind of discussed back and forth how we're going to do it. What I'd like to do is give everybody a couple of weeks to sign up for Patreon, to become a Patreon sponsor.
Okay.
Right. So let me see. Today is the 19th, so let's say the first episode into June.
Okay.
Is that
so
2 weeks?
That'll be 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks from now.
2 weeks from now. Yeah. The first episode into June that we record, we will pick a winner randomly from our patrons.
From our list of Patreon supporters. All right.
I will tell you that it does tell me whether or not that your information is correct. Like it'll have a list of patrons, and I don't know how it shows what it shows on the front page, but if next to your name it says, the payment information is wrong, and you've never paid anything, which is fine. But like I said, you don't have to financially support this podcast for us to do it. But I am not going to give it to you. That's not going to be the way that's
If you
gonna
sign up
go.
for Patreon and actually donate via Patreon, even $1 is totally acceptable.
$1
is totally acceptable.
$1 is totally acceptable. So we're going to do 2 weeks. So 2 weeks, and then and in this case, it will be did you say Star Trek?
Well, that's what he mostly has on hand, but he still has a list of models that he has available to build. So once we pick the name, we'll get you in contact with Andrew.
I thought he said he was going to pick it himself. I didn't think
Originally he was, but I talked to him on Twitter. I'm like, if you're willing to just give a list, it might make it a little bit more special. But I mean, he's donating this, so whatever he wants to give, we're happy with, and we'll put you in touch.
Yeah.
Whose ever name is drawn, we'll put you in touch with Andrew. You guys can work out.
Let me put it this way, Andrew. This is what you do. All right, the list that you provide,
yes,
is populated with only the models you're willing to do.
That's right.
So if that's a list of one,
exactly,
then that's perfectly acceptable. I can live with that. So that's very exciting. So I'm looking forward to see what he does. His work is very good.
Yes.
And very exciting. The Warbird is awesome. So I'm extremely excited about this.
Yeah,
and
you can join Tom and myself and our previous winner Joseph and have a lovely model. I was saying if I tried to make any of these, they'd be like, globs of glue and specks where I missed with the paint. It won't look as good as what Andrew does.
If I were to make it, you would know when it was done, when you found the box and all of the pieces in the recycling bin, because I had destroyed it. So with my butterfingers. So all right, here we go. Let's go do the news here. Carl, comes from Carl. 2020 was supposed to be the year that the next Gen TV, aka ATSC 3.0, would roll out in a big way. It was always meant to coincide with the 2020 Olympics in Japan, which was delayed.
Yeah.
So obviously the global pandemic has changed almost every part of that plan. Events where next gen TV was supposed to be demonstrated have all been canceled. Broadcasters have had to focus on major adjustments to their programming rather than focusing on the shift to ATSC 3.0, including how to get people's hair to look the way it's supposed to look and not show the roots
when they're doing it themselves at home.
Yeah, they've opened up like great clips. So just like one of the budget haircut places had a big "We're open" sign, and they had people sitting in chairs outside, lined up to get in there. I'm like, no.
You can go the way I go. It's easier.
Yeah, the Olympics set themselves up delayed to 2021, and there was never a mandatory transition date the way there was back when we shifted from analog to digital television broadcast, so who cares? But the only thing that has remained in place is that LG, Samsung, and Sony are all still releasing TV sets with built-in ATSC 3.0 tuners this year. A handful are already available, but of course, unless you're living in one of the test markets, there aren't any channels to tune into. So a delay in the rollout of next-gen TV is obvious, but it won't necessarily all happen in 2021 instead of 2020. The bottom line is that the delay will likely be even longer now, which means streaming services that have that much more time to gain the leg up.
Yeah, okay. So there was a bit of an interesting analysis that was done in the link that Carl sent us. We'll have that link at avrant.com and in the show notes for this episode. You can read through it yourselves. But
I can't think of anything I'm less excited about than ATSC 3.0. I can very rarely think of anything in home theater or anything that makes me less excited than broadcast TV.
Television.
I mean, I know it exists. I know it's out there, and I'll be honest with you, streaming, while I love it and it's an important part of my life, it's really irritating when you're like, oh man, I want to watch Dodgeball. I haven't seen Dodgeball in forever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like impossible. Like you have to buy it or rent it for like $5. I'm like, I'm not renting this for $5. It's Dodgeball. It's got Lance Armstrong as like a hero in it. Come on, guys. Did not age well, that scene.
Many movies have not aged well, but
that's true.
Yeah.
So okay, let's go on. Comments from some of our listeners. Daryl had previously asked about sticking with towers versus switching to bookshelf speakers for his clip speaker setup. We said bookshelves would be more than fine, but then he tried out Crutchfield's Speaker Compare virtual online auditioning tool that Lee and Rob discussed last week.
We did.
What is that?
So they measured all the speakers that they sell at Crutchfield. They measured them in an anechoic chamber. Then they combined those measurements with some like ambient room sound so that it doesn't actually sound like they're in an anechoic chamber. Then they also profiled a whole bunch of different headphones. So if you can find the headphones that you own in their drop-down list, then they have profiled for your headphones. If not, they actually offer a rental kit so that you can rent headphones that they have profiled. And then it allows you to listen to these speakers over the internet through their website in a way that I said, because I listened to a number that I was at least a little bit familiar with, and I'm like, you can't make any judgments about the bass because that is entirely room dependent. And unfortunately, because you can't filter off the bass, that means that, it masks some things that your brain just can't completely ignore bass just because you tell it to. So that's a downfall of the thing. But for a very generalized sense of, are these speakers have more extended treble? Do some of them have faster transient response can even show up and that type of thing? So in a very general sense, I say it is somewhat useful. Don't make all your decision on it, but it is good enough that you might be able to eliminate something as a choice. You might say, no, that one is pretty clearly not for me.
Anyways, he was blown away by how much he preferred the SVS Ultra speakers, particularly the center versus his Klipsch speakers, so he decided to make the switch. He wound up with SVS Ultra bookshelves, that's what I got, and the center, that's what I got. Dual SVS SB2000 Pro subs, his existing in-wall DefTech bipoles in his back wall, SVS Prime Elevation front heights, RSL in-ceiling top middles, all powered by an Anthem AVM 60 Prepo and the Emotiva XBA9 amp. Mm-hmm. He also added some GIC acoustic panels, and the sound he's getting compared to his older setup is much better, and he's really enjoying it. I was absolutely right in that he didn't need towers. And since it seems like we were right about everything else, he figures he'll add surround speakers to his sides, as we suggested a little later on. Just assume we're right about all of this stuff.
I always say,
just fair.
I mean, Tom has actual credentials in this field. He was professionally a writer in the field of home theater and audio video equipment. I have no credentials other than having done this podcast a whole long time. But
that is actually a credential, though.
But that's a kind of weird credential to kind of claim, because I don't. Anyway, my point being, the only thing I have is to give out advice for people to test that advice and either say, hey, that guy was onto something, or hey, that guy's way out to lunch. So as long as most of the time people are like, hey, that guy is onto something, then that's kind of a credential. And that's all I've got. That's all I got, folks.
Well, that's pretty much how we all did all the stuff. I mean, you can't go to school to be a AV writer.
Well, you can pay for...
go to school to be a writer.
You can
go to school to be an AV designer, but there's no degree.
You can pay for classes to be a acoustic calibrator and come up with a bunch of wrong information. You can do that.
I have also done that. I got the THX video calibration certification.
Well, that's pretty much all right.
That has since lapsed.
That was well before
whatever.
HDR though that you did that. So you're.
That was a long time ago. Yes, yes. That was when 1080p was really just becoming a thing. Jay wanted to relay how impressed he is. Oh, this is the coffee. So somebody asked me last week about coffee, what coffee I drink, and blah blah blah, and they completely cursed me.
Okay,
sorry, whoever did this, but I went and bought my coffee at Sam's, like I do, the big thing, because it's massive, and I was very excited about it. And somehow, inexplicably, I left it in the cart.
Oh.
Didn't take it home.
Darn.
And I've been back to Sam's twice since then, and both times I've forgotten to buy coffee,
man.
even though it's on the list. So this is clearly a sign that I have been cursed by one of my listeners.
That's right.
Dang you. I don't know.
Old man shakes fist at cloud.
So Jay wanted to relay how impressed he is with the Nespresso as compared to the Keurig, because I talked about Keurig last week. Just like Arinder, Jay's wife is a real coffee lover in their household. She went through both Keurig and using a French press, just like me. The Nespresso is pretty different. No excess water stays anywhere in the machine, other than the reservoir, and the sensor ensures you thoroughly clean it when necessary, rather than just giving you a recommended schedule. It like beeps or something at you. So these things use aluminum pods that you send back to Nespresso for recycling rather than disposable plastic pods. But most of all, his wife says it's the best coffee she's ever had. So chocolate, one more strong recommendation. Some people don't like that you have to buy the coffee from Nespresso, but they make the shipping easy both ways since you have to send back the aluminum pods. And Jay and his wife think the price is reasonable. That's fine. I'll look into it. I mean, It's very hard to convince anybody in my house right now to buy anything new. So,
Yep.
so I'm probably stuck with the French press for now, but I'll put it on the wish list. Maybe I'll take a closer look. So thank you for the information. This is from Chris. Chris says we recently said that Apple AirPlay is lossless. That's not exactly what we said, but it's very close. And indeed, it is full 16-bit, 44.1 kilohertz CD quality without any lossy compression, which is what we said. But FLAC and ALAC
That's
can
the
have
Apple
higher.
lossless. Yeah.
That's the Apple one. Can have higher bit rates and sampling rates, and those would be down converted if you're playing AirPlay. To be clear, he's never had any misgivings or complaints about that, but he's not sure if it's right to say AirPlay is fully lossless. Yes, pedantically, you are right. It is lossless in all of the things that you can hear.
Right. Well, it's lossless also in that it isn't applying lossy compression such as MP3 or
Right.
AAC. It is not actually throwing out data other than if it were down converting higher bit rate, higher sampling rate formats. It is down converting those to CD quality. But as Lee and I had a long discussion about in that episode, that is entirely fine and it is not applying lossy compression. So in that sense, it is lossless.
From Jack, after previously talking about the Quiet Box from IsoStore as a less expensive pre-made backer box for in-ceiling speakers and lights, Jack searched through IsoStore's other products and found their Hush frame connectors, which are an alternative to sound clips. They're basically just some sandwiches of OSB, but damped with a rubber silicone conductor. You can use regular furring strips instead of hat channels, although you can use metal hat channels if you want to, but most important to Jack is that you have the option to install the furring strips parallel to the existing joists or studs. This can save additional space since the Hush frames can be recessed, and then parallel furring strips can be as little as a quarter-inch proud rather than losing about an inch when the furring strips are installed perpendicular to the joists of studs. So a little bit cheaper, and they can save additional space. So there's the thing.
Yeah,
there's another thing.
It's kind of an interesting product. Again, I'll have to look at IsoStore a bit more, although those were kind of the two things now, the Quiet Box and the Hush frames that were, sort of unique offerings from IsoStore. This should function. There's no reason why. I mean, again, it's a damping product. That's what it is. How effective it is compared to Resilient Channel or Sound Clips and Hat Channels, I don't entirely know. I haven't tested them out according to their own STC testing compared to the more expensive Sound Clip and Hat Channel solution, which definitely takes up more space. The numbers they gave, I think it was in the area of about 3 STC points less than the more expensive and thicker combo of sound clips and hat channels. But still much, much better than attaching the drywall directly to joists or studs. Much better than that. And less expensive, especially like they're 50 cents each less expensive than the least expensive sound clips. But when you think about how many of them you need,
Right. Yeah.
then
that adds up pretty quick.
That adds up pretty quick.
Yeah. All right, Damien. Damien bought a 120-inch silver ticket screen. He went for a like-new Amazon warehouse deal. Unfortunately, it arrived with some of the hardware missing. Amazon sent a replacement even before he had returned the first one. But it was still a bummer to have to wait an extra week because of missing parts. The replacement had all the parts, but the included fabric was the wrong size. Good thing he hadn't returned the first one yet, so he put the first screen material on the second screen frame by himself. He stopped to drink a beer he was saving for afterward halfway through. Was it that surround sound beer? Because maybe
Nope.
no. Anyways, it all went fine, but he took quite a bit longer than the 20 minutes he had envisioned. The mix-up with the screen material led to some drinking and cussing, which is project mode in my house, at which point his son, who was going to help him mount it on the wall, decided he had other things to do. Damien wound up using the pedestal stands for his Ascend speakers to hold up the screen, and he managed to mount it all on the wall all by himself. His son picked that exact moment to return. They watched Underworld: Rise of the Lycans.
'Twas the first movie they watched on it.
That's just movies. Oh. Not great. Anyways, aside from the obvious increase in size, he would swear the image from his Epson 54D now looks sharper and the black levels look deeper than his previous screen. Can a screen really do that? I mean, technically, yes, it can. Mm-hmm. But we haven't steered him wrong yet, and his whole family loves the new screen, so the hassles were worth it. I mean, it could have less gain than your last one, or it could just be that the material itself is just better and cleaner,
more uniform. Also, the increase in size can be why it looks
Yeah.
sharper, because that helps with something like that. So yeah, we got an image of his before screen. This was a roll down screen that he got for free because it no longer rolled back up. But for his purposes, it was fine for the time being and for the low cost of free. But now he's got his new one. It does look that much cleaner. Takes up lovely all the space on his walls, fits exactly where he had planned for positioning his speakers and all that. So looks really nice, Damien. I'm glad you're happy with it. And sorry about the delays in the Amazon stuff, but unfortunately,
Damien, I'm with you, man. I always envision these things are going to take it only took me like 10 minutes to put it up there. I'm like, okay, handy mandy, that is not me. I'm gonna block out 3 hours on one day and an hour the next day because I assume that something's gonna go horribly wrong. So that's how I go. But that's we'll see.
Yep.
We'll see. So you just got to do that. All right, let's get to some of these questions here. Ilongo, I like saying his name. Ilongo wants to add some speakers out in his deck, but his wife does not want any speakers attached to the house. I'm gonna say Bluetooth speaker already, but whatever. So they agreed to put speakers hidden in the planter boxes. You can hide a Bluetooth speaker in the planter box. Just walk out there and drop it in. The deck has 2 levels, and what Ilongo mostly cares about is the seating area on the larger lower portion. There are 2 planter boxes on the left side of that lower deck, and a third planter box on the right in between the upper and lower deck. Okay. He was looking at the offerings from Outdoor Speaker Depot, even though they live in Canada, and he would likely wait until the border opens back up. OSD, or Outdoor Speaker Depot, has some 3-inch speakers that basically look like outdoor lamps. Being so small, they have no bass at all. So he's thinking he might add one of the 8-inch outdoor subwoofers that they sell. I'm not saying OSD. I'm not doing it. It sounds like the Office of Security Deposits or something.
Just stands for Outdoor Speaker Depot.
I know what it stands for. I'm not saying it. He already has an HTD, which is Home Theater Depot, I believe. 12-channel distribution amp.
Direct.
It is Home Theater Direct. Okay. It is very flexible. There are 2 pairs of RCA inputs that can be shared by any of the 12 individual amplifier channels. And furthermore, each individual channel can be summed together the left and right signals into a mono output. There's also a separate line in for each channel if you don't want to use a shared source. Each line in can also be summed into mono. There's individual volume for each of the 12 channels. And any 2 pairs of outputs can be bridged. So basically, this thing can be tied in knots. Okay, and you could take any source, put it has as many speakers as you want. It could be mono, it could be stereo, it doesn't matter. So each individual amplifier channel is rated at 45 watts and 8 ohms. So what do we think you should do? Should you go for these 3-inch look like a light speakers plus an 8-inch sub? Should you put a speaker in each of the 3 planter boxes, or just 2 planter boxes? And will that amplifier be sufficient to power the speakers? What about either of the subwoofers? If he still goes for one of those, how would the sub be wired? So I am not a humongous fan of outdoor subwoofers.
I don't like them at all, to be honest.
I don't envision a world in which an outdoor subwoofer is going to perform in any way, shape, or form the way you think it's going to. I would literally, and don't collate. You don't need to collate your speaker with your sub. I would literally put the subwoofer in the box with the speaker if I really wanted a subwoofer.
This is a case where you don't have walls. You don't have standing waves. These things are outside in the wide outdoors. It is not like having a subwoofer inside, and I can see why he would think that he needs them, because if he goes for these 3-inch ones that, they play down to like not even 200 hertz. Again, because they have no boundary reinforcement, they have no room game helping them out. It's just what those tiny little drivers can do all by themselves. So my honest opinion, I'm not in favor of this plan.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of having subwoofers to begin with. I would get larger speakers. And if your wife, did he say that they didn't want to be seen? Is that the problem?
Like she doesn't want them attached to the house. You know how a lot of people have outdoor speakers that are attached to the eaves of the house, basically, and firing down.
I'm telling you, man, I would just get a Bluetooth speaker and put it in the middle of the table and call it a day. But if you're really dedicated to this, I would get a larger speaker that would go in here, and they have the one. I mean, even I literally don't care what brand of this. Just the bigger the better, just so it has a little bit of bass. Yeah, they have the ones that look like rocks. They have the ones that are just like they are weird little platformy thingies that are outside. Ones that you put into the ground that just have a vent that comes up.
Those are usually the subs, though, that have that
those are
design.
usually subs, but
yeah, no, he's in Canada. He was going for something that was going to be an 8-inch quote unquote subwoofer anyway. I think you should get Paradigm's Rock Monitor 80. The 80 implies that it's an 8-inch woofer in this thing. They're available in a couple of different colors. So, I mean, it's already got the same driver size as what the sub was going to have, but instead, now you've got something that looks like a rock that can sort of hide in that planter box if you want it to. On top of that, they actually have dual tweeters, and the 8-inch woofer uses a dual voice coil so that you can actually feed a stereo signal to one of these Rock Monitor 80 speakers. So that's the solution I would point you towards. I don't think you need speakers in all 3 planter boxes. I think that I might actually put one of these as a stereo speaker in that upper planter box that's in between the 2 levels, and the other one in the diagonally opposite corner, so that you really cover that whole lower area, because you can fire the stereo sound to cover the entire lower seating area. That's how I would do it. I don't think you need 3 of them.
That's fine. All right. Do you want to tell them about this sub?
I had just linked to that so that you could have the link in case. I don't.
Yeah, I just can't imagine a world in which the subwoofers. I just rather have a speaker that plays down to 100 or 80.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say if he's bound and determined to do it, that out of the ones that Outdoor Speaker Depot sells, I would go for the one they call their Forza 8, simply because if you were to bridge one of your amplifier channels in your home theater direct amplifier, if you were to bridge it and use that to power the Forza 8, it would work, because it's an 8. Unlike most subs, it is rated at 8 ohms for that Forza 8, and it's only looking for about the power that the bridged mode delivers anyway. So if you were...
That thing's about the size of a planter anyways.
Exactly.
I don't know how big these planters are. It's like okay, so there's flowers, and then what's this weird plastic UFO thing you got in here that's taking up 3/4 of your planter? Don't look at that.
Yeah. No, I think the Paradigm Rock speakers are the way to go.
Adam, after discussing it further with his contractor and with Rob via an email, Adam has finalized the framing for his basement home theater. Yay. It won't end up being a perfect rectangle, but the final shape makes the best use of the available space, allows for the most sensible placement of the door relative to the necessary soffit, and will keep resale value as high as possible. I don't remember who this dude is.
He was the one who had, he could either put a... area in a large open area. He was thinking maybe barn doors to close it off sometimes. We're like, no, barn doors are going to rattle. Or he could make a smaller, it was the blue rectangle at the time. Perfect rectangle. He's like, should I make a perfect rectangle? Like, well, if you can, that's great. But ultimately I was like, look, you do have to care about what's best for the house. You can't just go insane, be like, it must be a rectangle. You might sell this place at some point. So he took the advice of his contractor. He took that advice, and he wound up with, I mean, it's close to a rectangle, but it opens up a little wider at the back. I had misinterpreted the original diagram. I didn't realize the stairs in this diagram actually go up. I was thinking they were coming down to the entry in the basement being beside the theater. That's actually where they come out on the upper floor in the diagram. So
that was not clear to me.
Yeah, the diagram's down farther lower, as you can see.
Oh, I haven't gotten that far away. All right, so the final room is 23.5 by 11.5 by 7 foot 8 inches high. The soffit drops down to 6 feet 9 inches, and the back of the theater is where it opens up a bit to be wider, which makes access to the door in the second row riser a lot easier. The plan is to go with the 120-inch screen with the first row at 11 feet and the second row at 17. He'll also put a matching soffit on the right side of the room so that all looks symmetrical, and lighting can go in the 2 soffits on the left and right sides of the room. All right, so lighting, soffits, blah blah blah.
Sounds good.
Yes,
I like the plan.
I kind of. So this thing this thing on the right here, that's the top of the stairs.
Yes, immediately outside of the theater there with the door swinging open thing, that is the top of the stairs. There's actually a little arrow down in the bottom right-hand corner showing that. That's going up. So the entrance to the basement is like over to the right.
Over to the right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That makes a little bit.
It does.
Well, yeah. Okay, it's fine. All right. So what am I looking at here? Okay, the final cubic footage is roughly 2,400 cubic feet. So which subwoofer should he get? Would PB1000s be enough? What about the clearance PB2000s that the SBS has on sale right now? He will wire up for 4 subwoofer positions. He won't put them in the corners, but he'll have them on either side of center and then mirrored on the back wall. That's fine, I guess.
Yeah, as far as the pre-wiring goes, that's totally fine.
The pre-wiring is fine. 2,400 is how? What was this? What was this? Let me scroll back up here. It's 23.5 by 11 by. This is not that big of a room.
It's not that big of a room.
I'm worried about space. 2 rows of seats in here. I mean, the PBs
he has plenty of room
big.
at the back, though.
Does he?
That's not a problem, and it's not as though he has to walk around the back to get to anything. He just has some space back there. The doors are on the side, and that basically walks directly to his back row of seats. I mean,
the PB2000s would be more than adequate for this space,
yes.
And I think, I mean, if you told me you bought PB1000s for this space, I'd be like, yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah. Like 2,500 cubic feet is right about where PB1000s are at their comfortable. I mean, and this is us talking, this is 20 hertz at like 108 decibels. You know, that's 2,500 cubic feet, and you're under that. So I would certainly say PB1000s are sufficient. Since the PB2000s are on sale, if you can handle the physical size, we're still going to say build yourself a cardboard model box and see how big those things truly are, because they are big.
I'm looking at either side of his little cabinet that he's got there, and I'm thinking to myself, I think so. The PB2000 is going to be real tight.
It's going to fill up that space. It's a big sub, but as long as they physically fit and you're okay with the price, they certainly won't let you down on the performance. But you know what? If PB1000s are simply more affordable and physically fit better, you also have to remember this thing is going below your screen, so don't forget about how tall these. You can lay them on their side, but then they're very big side to side. So PB1000s, they're, to me, 2,500 cubic feet is where PB1000s are comfortable.
What about SB2000s?
SB2000s? Yeah, that should work.
I mean, if you want to go for a sealed box and you want a smaller form factor, and completely unintuitively to anybody, the SBs aren't the SBs like $100 cheaper than the PBs because of the material cost differences.
In the 2000 Pro series, the SB 2000 Pros are $100 cheaper than the PB 2000 Pros, but the on clearance PB 2000s are less than both of them, so there's that to consider too.
So, I mean, if you want to go with a smaller form factor, the SB2000s, I think, would be perfectly adequate.
Probably wouldn't go SB1000s.
No.
If you were going to do sealed, I would go the SB2000 Pros, but PB1000s would be fine.
Yeah. So now that he has a final layout, he's determined he really doesn't need an acoustically transparent screen with a false wall. The 120-inch screen size fits within the soffits and provides enough space for his front, left, and right speakers and the center below. So any reason to spend more than what a fixed-frame white ticket screen costs? No.
Silver ticket, 120-inch fixed frame. That's very affordable and really good, and there isn't a compelling reason.
And you're not really. I mean, if the times that we worry about silver ticket in elite screens and stuff like that is when you're sitting so close that you might see some sort of bumps.
And even then, really only acoustically transparent. So
I really don't see any reason for you to do. I would jump on that. I would save some money.
All over that.
Not having to do the acoustically. I mean, it's cool. I know it's cool to do acoustically transparent.
To me, it makes sense. Like 120 is where you do still have room below the screen that your center speaker isn't like on the floor. It totally works. Once you start going to like the 135s and size up, unless you have a taller than normal ceiling and you're willing to have your screen that high, it starts to get a little bit squishy with putting the speakers around a 135 or larger screen. That's where I start to really consider. But I think you're hitting that sweet spot. So I would go silver ticket for sure.
So he could still do a false wall, though. Do we think he should? We already basically said no.
We don't think he should. No.
Would it actually be beneficial? We don't actually think it would. Would 2 feet be deep enough? Not if you're going to put the sub back there.
That, I mean, 18 inches is kind of the minimum. You can get away with 18 inches, although he's keeping his current tower speakers, which are a little deeper than a foot.
Right,
so
right.
you probably want at least 2 feet, but that is sufficient. That's just sufficient if you really were going to do this.
If you're putting a PV back there,
Yeah.
that's not going to happen. And what acoustically transparent screen would be best if you did with an Elite Screens Acoustic Pro UHD be a good choice? I mean,
I'm not gaga over those. I mean, I'm always going to tell you Seymour AV. If you're going to go acoustically transparent,
and then we're talking about humongous increase in price. It's worth it if
huge
over
the silver ticket.
Seymour AV is great.
Yes.
is great. And if you're going to go acoustically transparent, I have no problems recommending them. But you have to understand that you deciding to go with an acoustically transparent screen just so that you can hide your speakers behind a wall is going to cost you like $1,000 minimum. That's just like,
oh no, we're talking more than that. We're talking $1,500 difference.
That's just for the screen.
Yeah.
That's not even the wall.
That's not even the wall. You haven't even touched the wall yet, which has some cost to it too. No, we don't recommend you do it in this case. You don't need to, and it's hard to justify. Stick with the silver ticket.
So he's planning on having 2 pairs of side surround speakers so that each row of seats have their own surrounds. And with the false wall gone, they will end up just a bit behind each row of seats. He's left with a good amount of space behind the back row. So should he stop at 5.2.4 or go for the full 7.2.4? Well, let's all agree to disagree here because that's what's going to happen.
You pretty much know what Tom and I are going to say here.
Rob's going to say yes.
I'm going to
say no.
Tom's going to say no.
And that's just all there is to it. I would 100% go with 5.2.4, and I would wire for 5.2.6. I mean, I would consider.
You wouldn't even wire for the 7 while the walls are down?
No.
I would at least wire for the 7 while the walls are down. I'm not going to tell you that you must immediately mount speakers on your back wall, but I'm going to tell you while the walls are down and this room is under construction, at least wire for the surround back speakers because there's never an easier, cheaper, better time to do so.
I know. I'm like Mr. Negative about surround back.
To me, the more space you have behind your primary row of seats, and as we're going to find out, his front row is his primary row, the more surround backs actually can be useful, in my opinion. So I'm not going to tell you put the speakers there right away, but I will tell you to wire for them.
If you do wire for them, and I want you to spend some time with the 5 before you go to the 7, and then come back to me and tell me how right I am.
I'm
Thank
fair.
You very
that's
much.
fine. And you also, since you're going to have 2 pairs of side surrounds, you can very easily temporarily take one of those pairs of side surrounds and put them in the surround backs and just give it a try and hear for yourself without having spent any additional money on speakers, whether you like it or not.
So he won't upgrade his speakers immediately, but he's leaning towards SVS or Ascend. Those are both good choices. Mm-hmm. He would like to get the surround speakers right away, though, and he would like to be able to mount them flush on the side walls or have them on small shelves. Would the Ascend HTM 200 SE be neutral enough that they play well with pretty much any of the SVS or Ascend speakers in the future? The answer is yes. The SVS Prime satellites are rear ported, correct? Yes, they are. So they can't go completely flush against the wall like a sealed Ascends. Or what about the NHT Super Zeros? NHT Super Zeros would also be fine. I've got the satellites, and they are rear ported, and man, they're not flush. But they are real close. There is not a full inch behind them, I don't think. I 100% don't think that it makes one iota of difference.
Yeah, I don't really think you can go wrong with any of the ones you mentioned. If you just told us any of those 3 and you're like, that's what I'm going with, is that okay? We both of us would be like, yep, totally fine. Any of those 3. I mean, in a way, I'm almost like, well, if you know what front speakers you're going to get, why not get the matching ones? Because these are all within the realm of possibility.
And they're all, reasonably priced. See, there's nothing on this list that you've listed that's like, oh, well, these are, $700 a pair and these are $100 a pair.
Right.
Well, I'm not, will they play well? Well, no matter which front speakers I get. Well, all of these would sound good. These are all good speakers.
Yeah, can't really go wrong. So if you had to pick one, Tom, which of these 3 would it be, just so we can give a clear answer?
Well, did he tell us what speakers he was going with up front? He didn't.
He doesn't know for sure yet. He's leaning either SVS or Ascend, but he hasn't decided yet.
Well, I would get either SVS or Ascend.
Whichever one you're leaning more toward. All right.
Well, I would literally do the coin toss.
Yeah. Find out which one you react to as you're like, oh, I'm a little disappointed. Well, then you know it was the other ones.
Yeah. I don't see any reason for you to go NHT Super Zeros unless you are really enamored with their form factor, in which case I would say that's fine.
It's still fine.
I mean,
Yeah.
It's still fine.
Or even
You're
just the
still
price,
okay.
because I think out of all these three, they are the cheapest. And since your
That
room
would be
is
fine.
very much not wide, and you're going to have a pair of these for both rows of seats,
Row, right.
the no problem in terms of output as far as those. So if it's purely price savings, go ahead and get the Super Zeros. Otherwise, see if you're just naturally leaning a little more Ascend or SVS, and whichever one you're leaning a little more, get the matching brand. There, that's our answer.
For 4 Atmos speakers, he's going to all this effort to make the room soundproof. Is he going through a lot of effort?
Yes, a lot of effort to make the room soundproof.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he doesn't really want in ceilings.
Good.
He already has one pair of Polk OWM3s. That is such a hard number of letters to read because
It's
of all
what
the
they are,
points
though.
going in different directions.
Yeah.
OWM3s, which are inexpensive and thin, but his wife would prefer having the speakers way up high on the side walls rather than hanging overhead on the ceiling. So you should go with SVS prime elevation speakers and call it a day.
Yeah.
And that solves all of your other questions. Like you're getting SVS for all everything.
Yeah.
So there is also the option to mount speakers up high on the front and back walls, but the distances seem kind of long. He tends to focus on the front row. So what do we think the best placement? And do we think he should get another pair of these Polks? Because I'm not saying that letter thing again. Or should he pay quite a bit more for 2 pairs of SVS Prime elevations, or just try to match whatever he gets for surrounds? I think you should just. So he's now thinking elevations for front heights and rear heights.
Potentially,
is that what he's thinking?
Or he's
in
thinking,
which case surround backs are even more of a bad idea. I win.
Or he's thinking they would go where top fronts and top rears would go, except that they'll be high up on the side walls. But I'm also thinking he's gonna have these soffits. So if he actually puts them like closest to the ceiling, so like on the insides of the soffits that are along the 2 sides, then now they really aren't like wider than what top fronts and top rears would have been if they were in ceilings anyway. They just happen to be prime elevations.
How observant is your wife? Is the question I'm going to ask you right now. And don't take the offense to this, because if you mount the prime elevation speakers on the ceiling so that what would normally be on the ceiling if you were mounting it on the wall, right? So there's that long angle.
There's a long side and a short side, and then the angled side. Yeah.
Right. So there's the long side, the short side. So you put the long side so it's next to the soffit.
Okay.
And you mount it to the ceiling so the short side is coming out towards you. Then the angle is as shallow as it can be, pretty much. And you use those. So looks like it's mounted right next to the wall, but it's on the ceiling. It's mounted to the ceiling. Yeah. So would she care about that? In which case you could do it that way. I would be okay with that.
Yeah, like I'm not a huge fan of those Polks. I just have to say it. I'm not a huge fan of them. I agree with you that I don't necessarily want to put holes in your ceiling after you've gone to all this effort. He's purposely putting in these matching soffits so that he has somewhere to put his lights. So I'm like, I'm good with that, because that means you can basically create a shell, and then the soffits are kind of fake soffits inside just to hold your lighting. I'm in favor of that. I think it makes sense to mount your speakers in a similar fashion. So I'm good with prime elevations. I think that kind of makes it easy to go with prime satellites as your surrounds, to go with whatever SVS speakers you want as your fronts. You got SVS all around. You won't be disappointed. Don't even worry about it. I like that plan best. I agree with you that, front heights and rear heights, I don't even know if you'd actually be within spec of the 30-degree elevation angle, because they're going to be like 12 feet in front of you and 12 feet behind you. That starts getting a fairly shallow thing if they're just high on the front wall and back walls. So I like high up on the side walls, prime elevations. That's my choice.
So he's leaning towards a Denon X3600H for his receiver. He can add an inexpensive 2-channel amp like the Dayton if he opts to expand to 7.2.4. In the other receiver model, we would recommend more highly. I mean, it's perfectly fine. Can it do 7.2.4?
It sure can. It has 9 amplifiers built in, but you can expand it to 11.
Then that's fine.
I like that one. It's the best bang for the buck right now.
All right. All right. Somehow, inexplicably, Rob did an extra podcast without me last week, and we're only now getting to this week's questions. I don't know how that's possible.
There was only 2 questions left over, but they were long, so that's what happens.
Neil, and this is a question that was somehow previously missed. I don't know how. It may have just come to me,
It
in
looked
which case.
like it. I mean, I easily might have just overlooked it, though. But
No. I think it may have come to me. I usually check each one of the questions as I see them.
Yeah.
I check to make sure that they went to question at avrant.com. So, and then before I delete it or put it into a other thing, so I make sure that I know that's coming. So it could be I'm taking blame for this.
Well,
so we missed your question.
I don't blame you. I
I'm
easily
sorry.
could have missed it too. But you know what? We want to mention, Neil, thank you for checking back in because he didn't hear his name mentioned. He didn't hear his question answered. And he was kind of apologetic. He's like, maybe I just overlooked it. Nope. Neil, you were right. Nope. And thank you for writing back to us because
I did email him back right away with the short version of his answer.
Yeah, I mean, once in a while we inadvertently miss one. It's going to happen sometimes. So thank you for sticking with us and writing back to us anyway. He says he's from the Highlands of Scotland. So that's another Scottish listener we got there.
Rob misses questions every once in a while so that you won't suspect that he's a plant from a alien robotic race. All right, Neil from Scotland. I'm trying to watch The Highlander with one of my sons, but my wife keeps coming in.
The TV show version or the movie version?
The movie version, the original, the only one that really exists as far as I'm concerned. Neil has an Onkyo TX SR444 receiver. He says he's considering upgrading to an Onkyo TX NR696. He's mainly focusing on the 696 having THX Select certification. As far as other features go, the S696 has nearly double the output power. Both do Atmos, but the 444 was one of the earliest models, and it does not do DTSX. The 444 claims 4K pass-through, but again, being an early model, it doesn't pass through HDR or Dolby Vision. And Neil does have a Samsung Q6FN, which is 4K HDR QLED. But Neil's questions are about THX. Okay, so this is the question I answered, not all the rest of that stuff.
Okay.
That's what Rob added. His sitting room is roughly 12 by 14. He's got a couple of main sitting positions at 8 feet and 10 feet from the TV, and he won't be moving those seats at all. He's read that THX states that the seating distance for THX Select sound system should be 11.5. So will the sound be acceptable even though he is sitting closer? And the answer to that question is yes.
Yeah, that's actually the maximum seating distance.
Yeah,
it's not the recommend. Although, I mean, to be fair, in what I read, it says recommended seating distance 10 to 12 feet. That's the one I saw back when it was THX Select 2. So it does say recommended, but really that's saying that's the maximum distance away from the speakers you should be, given the amplifier power that's required to get THX Select certification. So you being closer, no problem.
No problem. Yeah. So what THX certification does is it certifies that certain whatever it is can meet certain parameters.
Mm-hmm.
And those parameters in this case is that it can hit full reference volume with a specifically rated speaker at up to 12 feet, which is basically what every receiver does.
That is possibly the most common thing there is out there is home speakers being 12 feet away hitting full reference volume with a normal AV receiver.
The other thing it does is make sure that it crosses over at 80 hertz, and it uses a specific slope when it does so, and a couple other things. But it's really that the THX certification is nigh on useless in my opinion
these days.
At one point it did have a lot of validity, but no longer. The second question is, will he notice a sound quality improvement with the THX certified versus his 444, or compared to a non-TH certified model? And the answer in that case would be no. I would be very surprised if he got this new one and noticed, because of the THX certification, that there was a sound quality improvement. Now, Rob listed a bunch of stuff at the very beginning there.
That's right.
That may have an effect on the sound quality, but it is not because of the THX certification.
And actually, most of your advantages would be on the video side of things, not the audio side of things. Now, having nearly double the output power, that does give you 3 decibels more headroom legitimately out of all of your speakers. It's not nothing. If your current setup was starting to distort when you turned it up to the volume that you want, then this does give you legitimately about 3 decibels more headroom. Nothing to sneeze at. That's legitimately twice the power going into into your speakers. But it's not because of being THX certified. That's not the reason. Another AV receiver from a different brand that had a similar amount of power to offer but wasn't THX certified would sound every bit as good. But the video side of things, being able to pass through your HDR signal, that's kind of important when you've got an HDR TV. So if this is the upgrade you want to make, I've got no problem with it. There's certainly a benefit on the video side, a possible slight benefit on the audio side, but THX is neither here nor there, so don't limit yourself to only THX certified receivers. You don't have to.
Yes. So if the selling point for you is you want this THX certification because you associate THX with good sound, I too associate THX with good sound because, Jurassic Park. There's a lot of history of THX sounding good. Me specifically looking for THX VHS tapes back in the day. So and DVDs. So I hear what you're saying, but there are reasons to upgrade a receiver, and there are things that you can benefit from. But the questions that you asked, as they were asked, the answer is yes and no. So, but I think that you could benefit from a receiver upgrade, but don't limit yourself, like Rob said, to just THX certified models, because that's a very, very small pool of receivers that exist out there. RS is or Eris?
I always say RS, but
RS or Eris? RS. Anyways, RS is looking to buy a townhouse. We don't do houses here, dude. Sorry, wrong podcast. Next question. Or possibly a detached house in the not too distant future. He's hoping to find somewhere that offers a space that's at least 20 feet long and 12 feet wide that he could turn into a dedicated theater. He's trying to figure out approximately what it would cost to soundproof a room that size. When he's searching online, he generally finds a figure around $3,000 to finish a room that size, but he isn't sure if that accounts for decoupling, 2 layers of drywall, plus green glue, etc. Could we offer him any sort of ballpark figure? I cannot. I mean, the soundproofing company could, but $3,000 doesn't begin to touch it. As far as I'm concerned,
no,
I don't think you're anywhere near the ballpark of what this would cost. I mean, $3,000, I don't think pays for all the drywall. Not much less the
I think you can get
glue.
all the drywall, but I mean, in my ballpark figuring of approximately how much drywall you'd need to double drywall a room that size plus green glue in between those 2 layers, just the drywall and green glue. We haven't touched the floor. We haven't finished this room at all. We haven't talked about any of the flanking paths, putty, none of that. But that plus sealant, I did include sealant. I ballparked that at about $2,500 just in materials. Now that might be, I mean, if you're able to get like contractor pricing, it's going to be lower than that. But this is if you're DIYing this and just buying the materials yourself. That alone is about $2,500. I think once you get into, sealing up everything with putty pads, actually finishing this room, plus doing the floor, because that's not cheap, I think you're going to be looking, basically take that $3,000 and double it. I think you're going to be looking at around $6,000. That's materials. That's you doing all the work. I think if you hire someone to do this, they'll be able to get the materials a little bit less expensive, but I would ballpark it in the $8,000 to $10,000 range. I think that's going to be kind of reasonable for it to have somebody come in and finish a room that size in a fully soundproof fashion.
Yeah, he's not gonna like that answer too much.
I know, but you want to be realistic.
Yeah, I think I honestly, realistically think that at 8 to 10 feels like no paint.
That might be on the low side, even.
Yeah, I feel like it's a little bit on the low side.
Could be.
No paint, no carpet, no finishing touches, just walls that are in floor and ceiling.
This isn't a large room, but once you also factor in, are you running conduit, which we're probably going to want you to do? Are you running any new electrical, any new lighting, speaker wire runs, all that type of stuff, especially if someone else is doing it for you, then the price is going to be even higher than that.
So the area where he lives often gets flooding in people's basements. He's talked to some people who had full drainage installed, and it can cost them an order of 20 to 30 grand. He doesn't have that kind of additional budget to spend. So would it cost more to build a soundproof theater on a ground floor level? And would the audio performance be different compared to building a theater in a basement? If you're looking for a fully soundproof room, I don't think it matters what part of the house you put it in. It's all going to costs kind of the same? I mean,
yeah, it's mainly if like you're more likely to be dealing with full-sized windows on a ground floor versus a basement. That
sure.
might be somewhat of a factor. The way that you construct the floor is going to be slightly different, although you definitely already have a subfloor on your ground floor level, so you're
Right.
not constructing a whole like subfloor, but in terms of if you want full soundproofing, you're going to have a slightly different underlayment on a ground floor versus a basement floor, that type of thing. But there's no particular reason why the sound quality inside the theater should be significantly different. There's just going to be some different, if you're building against a foundation wall, well, then you're just going to frame against that. Whereas if it's an existing ground floor room, maybe you don't put up new framing, but you do completely decouple the drywall with sound clips and hat channels, for example, something like that. So there could be some differences, but the end result inside the theater, there shouldn't have to be any difference as far as that goes.
So he says if you're starting with an existing room, how much extra space does the soundproofing construction take up? I mean, with the hat channels, if he does the whole
if you do
9
the whole
yards,
shebang, yeah.
it feels like what, like 4 inches on each wall or something like that, 3 to 4 inches on each wall.
Yeah. I mean, you're losing at least an additional 3/4 of an inch to extra drywall and green glue. Then you're losing about 1 3/4 inches. So you're looking at about 2.5 inches. Is that so? At least on each side wall. That's if you're just like you've got a finished room, you take down the existing drywall, and then you put sound clips and hat channels onto the existing studs. If that's what you're doing, you're. I would say you're. To be safe, I would say take whatever where your studs are now and subtract 6 inches from the width of the room and 6 inches from the length of the room, and that's going to be approximately the finished dimensions instead of only the 1/2 inch, 1 inch total from just putting drywall onto the existing studs.
That's fully soundproof. I mean, fully soundproofing is expensive, but go to soundproofingcompany.com and
yeah, they can give you further
ask
information and probably
give
more accurate prices than we can.
Yeah. Mark's room is roughly 25 by 17 by 8, but it's open at the rear left into the kitchen. He has a 7.1 set up at the moment with DefTech Pro Sub 60. What is that? DefTech Pro Sub. It's subwoofer, 8-inch, 150 watts rear slot port.
Yep.
Rear slot port.
It's a little guy.
Oh, weird. And his 4 surround speakers are all in ceiling. He is pre-wired for 2 different subwoofer locations, but they are both on the right-hand side in the front and the rear corners.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Yeah. He has a maximum budget of $500 to spend on a new sub. What should he get? Well, I mean, a PB1000. I mean, it's $500. It's big.
If $500 is what you have to spend,
that's what you spend it on. There's not a whole lot of options out there.
There is one. Very good alternative, which is in performance essentially identical, and it's the same price, and that's Monoprice's Monolith 10-inch ported sub. I mean, in physical size, in price, in output, in extension, the two are darn near identical. So if you just happen to like the looks of one of them slightly more than the other, then that decides it for you. But yeah, SVS PB1000 or the Monoprice Monolith 10-inch ported version. Now, neither of those is really going to
pressurize
get you
the space, not even close.
Full reference volume stuff. I mean, you got the door at the front of your room, so you're going to want to close that, but you've got this pretty large opening into your kitchen that doesn't have any doors. So, and it looks like, I don't know what goes down that hallway, if that opens to something else at the back of your room. So you're not going to have full pressurization, but this is as good as you can do with a $500 budget. And both of them are fully DSP protected, so they will not break themselves. You can literally turn the volume knobs up on them as high as they will go, and they'll still be fine. Both of those choices. So one of those two.
What do you think, front or back?
I don't know. Try them both. You've got 2 options. Try them.
Yeah. I'm kind of feeling front, to be honest with you.
It's very tough to predict in a room that's open and irregularly shaped.
So he asks, should he continue using his DefTech sub as a second subwoofer? No.
Nope.
No. Retire that old boy. Yep. Let him spend the rest of his days in the pasture that is your closet or an office or someone else's house. Yes, he has done his best for king and country, and God love him. He deserves a rest.
There you go.
He has been chuffing along in this big old room, wondering when his mortal toil would end. So here we go. Good boy.
Mhm.
Infinite Gary. Gary has been chatting with the managing director of Trinov. He's been explaining to Gary how the Trinov Optimizer works, but also saying there's really no way to know exactly how the Trinov correction system would sound different from an Anthem Arc or Odyssey in Gary's room without hearing it in person. He did say, though, that any correction system is going to do a better job if you already have installed passive room treatments and you're using good speakers, and then a system like Trinov's, which is entirely manually adjustable, it comes down to the skill and experience of the person using it, or the person who programmed it, in the case of both of the other ones. Gary's theater is treated. He's using very capable Dynaudio speakers, and the room design and Anthem Arc calibration were all done professionally. Do we think it would be fair to say that a Trinov setup would end up sounding so similar that if he listened to his Anthem setup, then left the room and came back with a Trinov setup, that he wouldn't even notice any difference? The volume being the same, I would guess that unless there is some sort of specialized curve that they are applying
Right.
for them, that they were trying, a target curve they're trying to hit. If they were going for flat in both cases, volumes levels being kept constant, I would expect it to sound remarkably similar.
Yeah, if both of them were aiming for the same target curve, I think you would not be able to tell them apart. But I mean, even more than that, Trinov is so flexible that if they wanted to, they could make it sound very different from your Anthem Arc, although Anthem Arc is also so manually flexible that you could make it sound very different from the way it sounds now if you really, really wanted to. But the Trinov is enough that they could make it sound the same as what you have right now. They could do that, or they could make it sound very different. But if the two of them were aiming for the same sound, you could certainly get there with both systems. Yeah.
I mean, I think that the basis of this question and this line of questioning, if maybe I can head this one off at the pass, is, what could be or should be or are the differences between the sounds of the different room correction systems.
Right.
And the reality is they are all doing the same thing, and most of them in very similar ways. Some of them are very different ways.
Trinov's is different, legitimately. Yeah. They do things differently than everybody else. Yeah.
But the fur filters are sort of ubiquitous these days, and parametric EQs have kind of fallen out. But the reality is, no matter what tool you're using, they're all going for the same thing, which is accurate room.
Although, I mean, the different systems do have, by default, some slightly different target curves. And that can be the reason why, if you just take them out of the box and just run them in their automatic mode and make no manual changes to them, you can pick out differences sometimes.
Right.
And we happen to know, I mean, we've been talking to Gary for years and years and years at this point, and he tends to go by sort of, I take it out, I plug it in, how does it sound? If I don't like it, I send it back. I don't bother. He plays around with stuff on one hand, but on the other hand, he doesn't like to have to make it sound the way he wants to sound.
He only plays with the settings when we tell him not to.
Pretty much. So, the
after a professional calibrator has done it, he's like,
So perhaps
what does this button do?
Perhaps the idea is like, if he just bought an Anthem and then he just bought a Trinov and just did the auto setup without any changes being made. But the thing is, Trinovs are never installed that way. Trinovs always come with someone who installs it for you and makes manual adjustments to the Trinov optimizer. So if you tell them, this is the sound I want, or this is how I want you to adjust it, Trinov has the power to do that. And therefore, it could sound exactly the same as what you have now, or it could sound significantly different if you instructed the installer to do so.
But if you instructed the installer to go, and they did
to just go for
flat, and it was flat for both of them, or all three of them, including Odyssey, I would be surprised if you heard many differences in your room. I would be very shocked. So he asked, why do the room correction programs play multiple chirps in a row out of each speaker? Are they just taking an average, or does each chirp actually used for something different in the correction? I don't know the answer to this question. My guess would be it's just not just taking an average, just making sure that all three of them measure about the same, so that if there was something that was there was a sound that threw it off in one, they could say, okay, well, that one's off.
As far as I know, like with Odyssey or YPOW, the somewhat less expensive ones, they pretty much are taking an average. They play the chirps 3 times each speaker.
Yeah,
it comes out 3 times, and they take an average of that, so that you're not just relying on a single measurement. There could be something anomalous in that, but I don't think they're as sophisticated as they'll like analyze the 3 chirps and throw one of them out. As far as I know, they're just doing a pretty plain average on those. Trinov is different. Trinov is going to play chirps out of your speakers multiple different times. Each speaker is going to have chirps played out of it multiple different times, because they actually do gated measurements where they measure only the direct sound and then only the reflected sound and then only the reverberant sound. So you get at least 3 measurements out of each speaker, and each measurement has multiple chirps. So yeah, there can be quite a bit going on in something like Trino, but the other ones, it basically is just an average.
So what do we think about the claim that some people just enjoy upgrading their home theater gear, even when it doesn't make a noticeable difference to the movies or music? Can someone just love the gear itself, or should the only reason to upgrade be the difference it makes in the sound? This is not a claim, Gary, because first of all, this is... I mean, did you look in the mirror as you said this? Because this is...
he believes that everything he's bought has made a worthwhile difference to the quality.
It's great. That's great. Yes. That's great. I'm glad that you feel that way. Some people, and I would argue, including you, enjoy the upgrading process. And honestly, man, there is absolutely no problems with that. It's not a claim. It's a lifestyle. I mean, people collect salt shakers. Sure. You think they don't collect amplifiers? Look at Rob's closet. I mean, you can't, because it's full of TVs and receivers and speakers and
I've got
everything
TVs
else.
And boxes I'm not using at all.
It's people like upgrading. Yes. They do. And yes, they upgrade. And like Rob drove a bajillion miles to go get a TV. And then, is that the one you're using now?
It's not even the one I'm using anymore. I upgraded that.
Yeah, so I mean, this is yes, people, and yes, they all feel like when they get a benefit from it. And that benefit is an emotional satisfaction they get from knowing that they eat just a slight bit more performance out of it that nobody, including them, could ever tell on the blind test, or an A/B comparison.
Yeah, no,
sometimes they can, for sure. I mean, there are worthwhile upgrades that people make. But, I mean, if you came in here today and told me, hey, Tom, would you like the exact same receiver you have, but it's basically a Marantz with that little Marantz window on it? I'd be like, yep. Yes, I would. I would like you to put that in my receiver, my stuff right now. I would like you to do that. If you came in here and said, Tom, I've got a 17-channel amplifier I'm not using. Would you like it? Yes, I would. Do I need it? No, I do not.
I'd take a monolith HTP1 processor. Someone offered it to me. I would have to buy another multi-channel amp. Don't have enough.
I mean, clearly,
no choice would I have.
What other reasonable choice could he make other than that?
It's not a choice. Necessity.
Nick has been using this LG C9 OLED for a few months now, but he's still trying to get the picture settings just right for his viewing environment. His room can be pitch black, but he finds that uncomfortable when watching his OLED, so he turns on a single lamp with a 25-watt bulb. He started with Rob's suggested LG OLED settings. HDR and Dolby Vision look great, but he struggled a bit with the SDR settings. He figured at ISF, dark must be the right place to start. He's not in pitch blackness, but his room is still very dim. According to the brightness and contrast test patterns on his Spears and Munsell disc, he has those set correctly. And for most movies, everything does look correct. I'm going to sneeze. Hold on. Oh my God, it's coming. But for TV shows, especially ones that tend to be mostly dark images, they look too dim. He can't see any details in the shadows. He's tried increasing the OLED light setting. He kept nudging it up higher and higher. And eventually, bright scenes looked too bright and a bit washed out. And he still couldn't see the shadows. So he finally tried ISF bright instead, and that looks much better. So can we explain what's going on here, and how is it that even when he kept increasing the OLED light setting, the shadows never got brighter, and the Spears and Munsell test discs always said his brightness and contrast settings were correct, even when the bright scenes looked too bright? What's the point of a test disc if it doesn't help you figure out these settings?
So you're dealing with a couple of slightly confusing things, the primary one being gamma. Gamma is the big difference that you're seeing there. So in the ISF dark mode, especially if you're going by the settings that I recommended, you'll be using the BT1886 gamma now, because we have that. It's like a fully standardized gamma for standard dynamic range signals that are digital. But before, that used to be what they called gamma 2.4. BT1886 is really, really close to gamma 2.4. And gamma 2.4 is such that the rate of rise from black to dark gray to lighter gray and so on is shallower. As the signal says get brighter, it only gets a teeny bit brighter down in those dark gray areas. And most movies are mastered to a 2.4 gamma. And that's why your movies looked fine. Most television shows, though, are mastered to a 2.2 gamma, which means the rate of rise from black to dark gray to light gray is higher. As the signal goes up, it gets brighter than a 2.4 gamma would. There's a greater difference in how bright it's getting along that curve. So the ISF bright mode is set to a 2.2 gamma. So it's really the gamma that is determining what you're seeing in those shadow details. And there actually is kind of a difference between movies and TV, unfortunately. Although if you sort of stick with the 2.2 gamma, you might be seeing slightly brighter gray in some movies than you're really meant to, but you hardly ever complain about that because you're able to see the shadows. So some places always recommend sticking with a 2.2 for that reason. Now, the OLED light setting is simply increasing the maximum light level. So if you're measuring what is the peak light output in nits, as you increase the OLED light setting, that gets higher and higher. But what contrast and brightness are setting is the video white level for the contrast and the video black level for the brightness. And the test disk is simply giving you typically a raster of 10 squares, and you're just supposed to adjust it until you can see in between each of those squares, that the square next to absolute black doesn't just blend into black, that you can notice that it's black to dark gray. That isn't going to change depending on your maximum light output level. The difference between white and the square next to white, that's all just in the signal. And adjusting your contrast and brightness changes that, but it doesn't change the peak light output. So you're dealing with three things. You're dealing with video black and video white. Those are your contrast and brightness, and the Spears and Munsell gets you to set that correctly. You're dealing with your actual peak light output in nits, and you'd kind of need a light meter or a proper colorimeter or something like that to measure that to see where you're actually getting. But you can kind of just go by, okay, when does this look too bright to my eyes? And primarily you're dealing with the gamma. That's the rate of rise from black to gray to white.
Okay. Exciting. He's been using Hulu a lot more lately, but all the TV shows have a static channel logo in the lower right corner. He's worried about burn-in. The C9 OLED has a setting that's supposed to reduce the brightness of channel logos and reduce the chances of burn-in, but when he toggles between low, high, and off, he doesn't notice any difference at all. Is there something else he's supposed to do? How worried should he be? If you have your settings correctly, and you do, because you followed Rob's instructions to begin with, or the link that he sent you to, it's very little chance that you're going to have burn-in.
It's very low.
It's and since you're not watching Hulu exclusively and 24/7, I would worry about this zero much. That's how much I would worry.
The C8, the C9, and the now C10 or CX, they've all got panels where burn-in has been significantly less of a problem than the C6 and C7 that came before them. Also, the reason you're not seeing a difference when you just toggle between low, high, and off is because there's actually a time delay on the thing. It waits for that logo to have been there for a while.
A certain period of time. It's got to be able to, it doesn't know it's a logo unless it's static.
That's right.
A certain amount of time.
So there's a delay on that. You don't see it just toggling over time. So the high mode will be the most aggressive. It'll wait the least amount of time and then dim it the most, versus the low, which will wait longer and then dim it not as much. And then, of course, off does nothing. So that's why you're not seeing it immediately, just toggling it. But I wouldn't... Yeah, I'd go ahead and turn it on. I'd start it on high. If you find it objectionable because it starts to dim too quickly and too much, then go to the low setting. Almost nobody finds the low setting objectionable. It's really kind of hard to see at all. But it does dim down that logo in the lower right-hand corner a little bit, and by and large, I wouldn't worry about this.
Bob on Twitter. Looking around the accessories for less, they seem to be out of stock for several of the more popular 9+ channel models that we often recommend, and the models that are in stock appear to have some slightly higher prices. All of that is totally understandable given the current circumstances, but what do we think the potential customers should do? Will the supply of refurb units return in a fairly short amount of time, so just wait, or just find the model you want elsewhere and likely pay more? We have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, we have no insider information on this whatsoever. We have no insider track. I mean, we could call over the accessory for less and talk to Mark, I guess, supposedly. We have his contact information, I
Well,
think.
I certainly have his
But
email.
but I mean, they're sort of at the whims of the manufacturers, who are the ones that are sending them the refurb units in
Yeah.
order to resell
I mean,
them. You know,
what's
they'll often
nice
know.
about accessories for less is they get their stock directly from manufacturers. They aren't
Yeah.
gray market. They also don't just get them from like store returns. They get them from the manufacturers. So yeah, they're at the mercy of what the manufacturers have to give to them as stock.
And with sales being whatever they are, and I
Mhm.
don't know if they're up or down or
I imagine they're
sideways or
down
whatever.
in an overall
I
sense.
just don't. I just think that stock is low right now.
Mhm.
Do I think stock will come back? Yes, I do.
Mhm.
And not only that, they will, they will release more receivers someday, and then we'll start recommending them. So if you're desperate for a receiver right now, well, then you only have whatever options you have available to you. But if you're not desperate for it, if you can live a little bit longer, I would have no problem suggesting it. Things will get back to something better than they are right now
Yeah.
eventually.
Yeah.
This will not be our new forever.
No,
This is not how this
we're
is
at a
going to be.
pretty low point right now as
Yeah.
we're recording this in the middle of May. So yeah, no, I mean, if you can wait, I probably would. I would also, like, if you're in the market, like it's not you have to have it right away, but you would prefer to, then I would continue to check. Like I just checked today, and they had some X4500Hs in stock, and last week they didn't.
Right.
But they have no X.
But that's all that happens with them all the time.
Oh, sure.
That's not
but
new.
it is a little bit more noticeable right now.
Right.
They have no X3600Hs in stock, and they haven't for like a couple of weeks now. So, if you're in the market, continue to check, I would say. And if you notice one and it's there and it's a price you like, go ahead and buy it. If you have to have a receiver today, well, you're probably going to go to Amazon or Best Buy and get that thing right away. And you will pay a higher price than the refurb, but you need it right now. And that unfortunately, that's the way things are right now.
That's the way that things are all the time. If it's
but
not
a little
available,
more so right now.
but more so right now. Nathan's been playing around with some online room mode calculators. He found it interesting to plug in different room dimensions and see how the room modes changed. But he noticed a trend that when he kept the dimensions, bedroom size was basically no dimension longer than 18 feet. At that point, there were no room modes below 30 hertz. Is that because any frequencies lower than that have wavelengths that are so long they can't actually establish a standing wave in a room that small? That can't possibly be the case. I mean, they bounce around and eventually they will hit each other.
I mean, for a true standing wave, it means that. So the thing about the room mode calculators is they are not like fully three-dimensional
right.
fluid dynamic synthesis. They are literally looking at length, width, height, and some diagonals as well. But it's based on straight line calculations. That's what the room mode calculators are doing. So when they say, well, we aren't so the 18 feet long is a 30 hertz wave. That's why you're seeing a standing, well, that's half of a 30 hertz. So that's literally the wave went there and back, and that's your standing wave at 30 hertz when it's 18 feet long. So that works perfectly, and that's why you end up with a standing wave there. And then all the audible frequencies, because we're only talking going down to 20, in an 18-foot long room, they don't perfectly fit, the there and back, there and back, there and back. So you don't get a standing wave between 20 and 30 hertz when your maximum room dimension is 18 feet, because that's going to be the lowest standing wave you get. And so it is kind of a case where the remaining frequencies that we're talking about don't perfectly fit into 18 feet or shorter, so you don't get that standing wave type of thing. That is kind of what's going on there. But it isn't the truth of what will happen in reality, because in reality, the waves are not moving in straight lines. And yeah.
This is like the easiest thing in the world to test too. You just take a sub, put it in a room, and a small bedroom, and then play a 10, 30 hertz to 20 hertz sweep, and then walk around. Does it sound the same every place you walk? Because I guarantee you it will not. And anybody who listens to this podcast who has a bedroom setup will gladly put their hands up and say, nope, that's not the way it works. So he asks, if that's the case, and it's not, would it mean that you don't actually need two subwoofers that can both play below 30 hertz in a small enclosed room? It's clear from the room mode calculator set from 30 hertz on up, there are plenty of standing waves, and multiple subwoofers would be the way to tackle that. But if there aren't any standing waves below 30, could you use just one sub that plays super low and then have a second sub that only plays from 30 hertz on up? I mean, it's not the case. So, but let's pretend that it is. So,
Okay.
just for argument's sake or whatever, or just whatever, just as a thought experiment here. If it were true that it was impossible to have a standing wave or an uneven bass response from a certain frequency on down, does that mean that you could have one sub that could play all the way down to whatever the lowest low is, and then have a second sub that only helped out up until that
From
point?
standing wave on up. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in theory, yes, that what he's saying makes sense. I would have a hard time believing that those two subs, depending on the size of the room and everything else, that they would be, really good matches. Plus, there's no brick wall filter on a sub. That, I mean, you'd have to build something or make something that would brick wall it at 30 hertz. There's no way of doing that. Was a high pass filter at 30 hertz?
Well,
at that point,
I mean, there are ways of putting in a very steep high pass filter. You stick some kind of filter in between the subwoofer output and the
right,
subwoofer
you would
input.
have to do that manually. It's not like you could just buy a sub that goes down to 30 hertz and then rolls off and then right there.
But more than that, standing waves are not the only issue in bass.
That's true.
It's not that standing waves are the only reason we go for multiple subwoofers. It is one reason, but this still doesn't address uniformity. Just because you don't have a standing wave doesn't mean you don't have poor uniformity across different frequencies. And the primary reason Tom and I always advocate for dual subwoofers is uniformity, not just getting around standing waves. So that's still going to be an issue. Non-uniformity is still going to be an issue, even if you don't have standing waves.
I think he's conflating those two things, though. I think that's what he's doing, is he's saying that standing waves create non-uniformity. Therefore, if you have no standing waves, you have no non-uniformity.
No, that's not the case.
But that's not the case.
That's not the case. Yeah. No, I mean, standing waves are the
That's
worst.
why I said it's a thought experiment. If there was nothing, if you could have if everything below 30 hertz was just even all the way across, throughout your room, well, then you could technically you'd have to make these other concessions. But the reasons why we have dual subs is not just because it fixes standing waves. It's because we get uniformity.
Yeah. No, I mean, a standing wave will mean that in a certain location you have literal silence, and in another location you have the craziest, loudest thing you could not even tolerate. That it is the worst case scenario, but you can still have, without a standing wave, one seat where there's a rise and another seat next to it where there's a dip, and that's not good. So, yeah.
Fred. First up, Fred wanted to answer some of our questions about the speakers he made himself, including the unusual upward firing surrounds. I remember this. The red around the tweeters of his front speakers is indeed just the faceplate. So if you've seen these speakers, they have a red, I don't know, it looks strangely like a Minecraft block or something like that. It's like a, I don't know how to describe it, but it's just around the tweeters, and the rest of everything else of the speaker is black. So it's just this weird red thing. He painted them himself because he wanted to splash of color, and the tweeters are BG Neo 3 planar magnetics. So this is one of those things where I don't think that the pictures are doing the speakers justice. Yeah. So anyways, his upward firing surrounds are actually mounted on his back wall. The specs call for them to be 16 inches from the ceiling, so that's what he did. If you listen to them straight on, they are way too harsh. So they are only ever meant to be heard completely off axis, with them firing onto a wall or ceiling first. They do tend to sound as though they are about 6 feet above him, though, so they might work out well as top middles after all. Okay, great. He's enjoying the switch to the Marantz receiver. Odyssey seems to have made a big difference, and manually turning on eARC and the enhanced setting for HDMI seems to have HDR and Atmos all working now. The video, this is his first question. The video from his Apple TV 4K does drop out every once in a while, though. He could use the app built into his LG GX OLED, but His whole family's used the Apple TV 4K. Any ideas? That's an HDMI handshake or some sort of audio switching thing?
It's the bandwidth. I get this too if I leave it alone at the full 444 12-bit Dolby Vision version of the output. If you go into the Apple TV 4K setting, and actually the easiest one here is to limit it to 420 in the Chroma setting. If you limit it to 420, I'm betting you don't have these little dropouts anymore, because it's not constant, which means he's right on the edge. Like, his cables are just on the edge of having enough bandwidth, but not quite.
So terrified that if I ever get the 4K projector that it's not going to work.
Yeah, no. This happens to me too, and setting it to 420, it never drops out.
So he has an Oppo BDP 893. It's a Blu-ray player. It's not 4K. The HDMI out 1 doesn't seem to be sending audio anymore, and HDMI 2 isn't working at all. So, surge protection. Optical audio still works, so it can function, but not with lossless audio. He was considering getting an Ultra HD Blu-ray player anyway. The Panasonic UB820 seems to be the heir apparent to the Oppo players. Was it really worth spending that much? What would we suggest he do? And since he's finding himself streaming more and more and using physical disc less and less, is it even worth it at all?
Now, I did have to say, I don't know if this stopped working before he got the new receiver and made the changes, because unfortunately with Blu-ray players, you often remember that HDMI enhanced setting that you had to turn on to get HDR passing through your new receiver? Yeah. Very often you have to turn it off to make regular Blu-ray players work.
So convenient,
as well as the Ultra HD deep color on your LG. You often have to turn that off to make your Blu-ray player work, and it can have the incredibly mind-boggling effect of making the audio not work while the video remains working. So if this only started happening recently, once you got this new gear and made these settings changes, it's a hassle and a half. But if you turn the enhanced off and the Ultra HD deep color off on your LG OLED and the enhanced off in your Marantz, then it might start working again. So check that. You might not need a new player at all. But if this all started breaking beforehand, you don't need the UB820. Because I mean,
isn't that really, we recommend that if you have a projector and you want to get the SDR or HDR.
Well, yeah, it's the HDR Optimizer that Panasonic has. It's also like the every HDR flavor player, HDR10, HDR10 Plus, and Dolby Vision. You don't have to get that one. Now, the problem is, in North America, the UB420 doesn't do Dolby Vision. And you have this LG OLED, and you probably want to see Dolby Vision light up. It's not super necessary. Your OLED does a fantastic job of dynamically frame-by-frame tone mapping HDR10 anyway. But, there it is. If you don't really need the HDR Optimizer at all for your LG OLED, and for that reason, if you could get a Panasonic UB450, that would kind of be the perfect player for you, but they don't sell it in North America, which is kind of dumb.
Right.
So
when is that going to change? That's
I don't know. So, I mean, the Sony players are the less expensive alternative, but they have the stupid thing where they do not automatically go in Dolby Vision mode. And then if you manually put them into Dolby Vision mode, they stick there even when the signal is no longer Dolby Vision. It's really, really dumb, but that is the less expensive. So, I mean, the UB820 ends up being the one that does everything nicely without you having to touch anything after you've initially set it up, but it is $500. So, the 450 would be the perfect choice. The Panasonic UB450, if you can find one at a reasonable price, great. But otherwise, probably the Sonys, and then you're just kind of dealing with manual Dolby Vision.
So the radio tuner in his Marantz wasn't working. He saved his settings, did a factory reset, and the radio worked after that. But when he loaded his saved settings back in, the radio stopped working again. Any ideas? It sounds like it's the saved settings, but I'm just spitballing here. What could you have done?
I don't
to make that not work.
The radio tuner. I don't know. I mean, literally the only thing I could think of is if you go into the settings for the inputs, you can hide certain settings. But if you still just automatically go there with the button on your remote, like the hide one means that as you turn the front knob on the receiver itself, it doesn't go to it. But if you just like manually go there with the button on the remote, like I don't know how the tuner could have been turned off, the radio tuner. This has totally stumped me. I have no idea. But he's like, he factory reset it. The radio was working. So we know it can function. It's not that his radio tuner is broken. I have no idea what settings.
I'm going to blame HDMI CEC. That's what I think of this. You told him to turn on the enhanced, and now the radio doesn't work.
I have no clue.
That's as good an excuse as anything that we're going to come up with.
Yeah. All I can tell you is you did the factory reset. It worked there. So I would unfortunately just abandon your original settings and kind of start
again. Yeah. I would do that too. Steve uses an Onkyo receiver, and he has a pair of upward firing Atmos enabled speakers. The Onkyo has a feature called ACU Reflex that is supposed to be for upward firing Atmos speakers. When he turns it on, he hears an echo coming from his upward firing speakers. If he disables it, it goes away. So what's going on there? If he disables ACU Reflex, does that also disable Atmos? Well, you can, sir, answer your own question by disabling it, going over to the speaker physically, putting your ear on it, and seeing if any sound's coming out. If it is, then Atmos is still working.
Right.
And just put your hands up and back away. That's what I would do.
So ACU Reflex is actually part of their ACU EQ room correction system. That's where you choose whether you have it or not. It is supposed to be the thing that only pays attention to the bounce that came off your ceiling and is supposed to ignore if there's any direct sound coming from the speaker. And the whole idea is that if the sound genuinely went from the upward firing speaker up to your ceiling and bounced back down to you, it would arrive slightly later, right? It traveled a greater distance. And that is what ACU Reflex is supposed to be about. But you have just discovered that there is sound that makes a straight line from your upward firing speaker to you.
Who would have guessed?
And therefore, if you set the distance setting, which is a delay on your speaker, such that it was calculating for the distance of speaker to ceiling to you, the greater distance, well, now that distance isn't correct for the sound that made a straight line from the speaker to you, a shorter distance. And therefore, apparently whatever the setting was enough to be detectable by your ears as an echo in the sound. Turn ACU Reflex off. As we've long suspected, we don't really think the sound is actually bouncing off the ceiling. We think it's all to do with the curve that is applied when you tell your AV receiver that you have upward firing speakers, and it does not disable Atmos to turn ACU Reflex off.
Right. Mike. So we are back to revisit Mike's living room that's immediately adjacent to his large entryway and then opens to his kitchen and family room. He appreciates us discussing what we would do if it were our space to work with, and he's back to ask some more questions and clarify a few things. There. It's got, you walk in the door, to the right, it's a half wall. Then there's this big space that has near a fireplace. I think it's a fireplace like cutout in it.
Yeah, it's not a fireplace, but there's kind of a nook next to the stairs. That's where he's got his TV right now, and then it's open on the right, kitchen
and family room. Blah blah blah. So we talked about maybe using the family room area instead, which he did consider when he first moved in. But it's very bright in there, even in the evenings, because he lives right next to a car dealership, and they keep the lights on all night. And it's can you imagine? Right next to a car dealership. These floodlights all night long. Reminds me of Daredevil's apartment and the TV show.
Or Seinfeld with
Maybe
the chicken
he's
restaurant.
Daredevil. Right. Okay. And it's more of a social area along with the kitchen. So he wants a space that is more dedicated for watching movies. And that's the living room, which that's fine. Okay. We sort of settled on the recommendation to rotate his living room setup 90 degrees so they'd have a much shorter viewing distance, and his back would be the entrance. He rendered that to get an idea of how it would work. So he turned it so that his back is to the half wall, sort of. And the TV is on across from him, and it looks very nice, and everything's beautiful.
I kind of really like it, to be honest. It looks
so he's concerned that it
nice.
would feel a bit small, and the left surround speaker might be a tripping hazard. What are our thoughts? Don't trip on it.
Well, I mean, not only that, he has options because you don't have to put your left surround speaker on a speaker stand. You could mount it to that half wall. You could stand it on top of the half wall.
You could get the speaker stand and put like a Mad Max style spikes all over it, and then people will not trip on it. They will impale themselves upon it only once.
Or round foam if you want to be
problem solver
nicer.
today. I'm killing it.
I don't really see a problem at all, to be honest. I
don't see
really
any
like
problems
this
here.
rotated setup. I think this is absolutely what I would do. And like we said, now the space where his TV actually is, that becomes a nice little reading area, couple of seats with a little, bookshelf built into that nook there. Comes your library. I really like the rotated 90.
So if you were to insist on a projector, what would we recommend? Rob mentioned maybe an short throw. What model would we suggest? I would suggest that you not get a projector in the room adjacent to the room that apparently has zero light control and a clear view of a whole lot of Chevrolets for sale, because you're just going to be fighting with all of that stuff. If I remember correctly, all these walls are white.
Oh yeah. You can see it in his photos there. Everything is bright colored.
Is white. So if there's a lot of light streaming into that open family room, which would be right behind here,
now, I mean, he did mention
bouncing everywhere else.
He could put curtains across the opening. I'm like, I don't know. You talked about how you want to be able to flow through this space and be able to have gathering in that, but he's like, I could put curtains across there. He insists he can make it quite dark in this living room at night, but I'm like, but you got white walls and you've got windows and it's never going to be pitch black in here. My thing, if you're like, I'm getting a projector and I don't care what you say, then
do you know how you're only sitting? How far away is he going to be sitting? Like 6-8 feet away from a.
Well, he'll be like 9 feet if he does the rotated 90 setup.
Yeah.
Which
from a
77-inch OLED is what we said to get if he does that.
Yeah, it's gonna look massive.
It's gonna look
awesome.
But if you're, I'll take the question as wrote. If you're absolutely insisting, I will still say that an ultra short throw is kind of the only solution here. I mean, you could really consider the very best ambient light rejecting screens that are out there, which he said he doesn't want to spend more than about $4,000 total on projector and screen. I'm like, well, then you're done, because the screen already costs $3,500.
Right.
But I mean, if you were gonna do this, I would insist on ultra short throw, and that would be Optima's Cinema XP1. It's $3,500. You're not going to be able to afford the screen to go with it, but it's like the only thing I could possibly recommend here. Don't do this, but if you insist, then that's what I'll say.
If you were to insist on keeping the layout as it is now, and you went with a drop-down screen, how big and what material?
So he's like 20 feet away away
from
the front wall. You can't get a screen big enough for that viewing distance. So
for that distance, you would have, unless
you have the screen much closer.
Drop down you have the screen drop down the middle of that space from the ceiling.
It looks like it's a pretty high ceiling because the stairs go up to the second level in this space. So that is a heck of a black drop above your screen coming down, which means it's going to wave.
Going to mess up the flow of the people walking through a little bit as they walk directly in front of the in front of and behind the screen, because they'll probably be right in the middle of that walkway.
But then on top of it, it has to be ambient light rejecting and acoustically transparent. So the only choice there is Illusion
Unless
Visions.
You want to have the speakers in the middle of the room where this thing will drop down.
I'm very certain he does it. The whole idea was keep it the way it is.
Tripping hazard. I would definitely recommend the spikes on the stands for that one.
So you're talking.
You might want to put spikes on the projector screen as well.
You're talking Illusion Visions perforated Aurora 4K, as large as they go, which is only 135 inches. So you have to mount it somehow closer to you with an incredibly ridiculous drop that's going to wave. That's going to cost you...
Don't open the window.
$4,700 just for the screen.
Right.
Don't do it, man. Rotate this place 90 degrees. But here we go, as wrote.
Okay. So we talk about... Oh, I'm sorry. We always talk about dual subs. That's not the case. It's not true. Don't.
It's pretty close.
Don't put my words in my mouth, man. Should he get a second sub? No, I don't think so. Not you rotate at 180. I'm sorry,
90.
Rotate at 90 degrees. Then right next to your couch, you put a subwoofer.
Which he's rendered right in there. So
he's rendered in there anyways, right?
Yeah.
So because there is zero chance or zero desire or zero recommendation from us that you try to pressurize the space.
He's literally trying to pressurize his entire house. So we're talking like Power Sound Audio's largest subwoofer, which then
is the size of a refrigerator.
Then you do run into space problems. I'll grant you that.
You know what Power Sound Audio should really do is just sell a subwoofer that is a couch.
Right.
It's built into the couch. Like
arms and cushions, yeah.
Like the cushions and all that stuff are on the platform that floats above the actual cabinet.
Yep.
But somehow, yeah, it's insane.
Well, I suggested
I would get a small sub, maybe a little sealed box from like a SB2000, and put it right next to your couch there, and
you
you'll have
live with what you have. Yeah. No, I suggested to SVS when they were putting out lots of promo photos and stuff, and they had they stack their subwoofers just to show the whole lineup. I'm like, you should take like a couple of your big cylinders, and then like a PB16 Ultra that's in front of it, and then like a couple of like the shorter cylinders on either side, and just like make a throne. It's like
you could do that. I was thinking you could make a Voltron out of it.
No,
that would be
you
cool
just make a subwoofer throne.
Yeah, this would be. I do not recommend you get a second sub, but there's no. We have no way of predicting what's going to happen with bass in this room, and you have there's no way you're going to be able to pressurize the space without a subwoofer that is, the size of.
Truly ridiculous. That just would not work. Wouldn't fit.
So yeah, just a small sub that fits in that little space between your couch and that wall. So he doesn't really want to stay with his current B&W speakers. We suggested auditioning SVS and Empyrean both, since they offer two-way free shipping. He's also, thinking of trying KEF JBL, RBH, Monoprice, Monolith, and ELAC. Any others that should be on this list? You didn't say Ascend, and you're talking to Rob? What are you?
Yeah.
Is this the first time you ever heard of this podcast?
I'm going to say Ascend should be on
your list.
He got
all mine. You got SVS, you got Empyrean, you got KEF, you got RBH. Monolith, and ELAC is you. I don't know where JBL came from, but then Ascend for sure would be the other one that I would put on there.
And I would suggest to you, I think Martin Logan could be something that you might really like. I mean, if you're willing to audition all these other speakers, why not add it to the list? Electrostatics in this type of room could be a really interesting experience, because they are going to have a very, very directional sound to them that is not terribly room dependent, and it's not going to have a very wide dispersion. It might not even hit all of your L-shaped couch area if you stick with the layout that we've suggested. But for the one primary seat, it could be a unique experience if you go with some Martin Logan electrostatics. If you're auditioning other speakers, why not have some fun and try a pair?
All right, that's going to be it for tonight. So we have left.
Okie dokie. So I don't even know how many more, but we got Brian F., Neil M., with many photos, so I am scrolling. Bear with me. Rob F., scrolling. Oh, that's it. All right. It was lots of scrolling, but not that many names. There we go. You fellows are on the list, and there were some questions, of course, that came in on Monday, and they'll be on the list for next week, too.
So, quick reminder, we're going to have another giveaway for a model of some sort from Andrew for one of our Patreon supporters. So please go to patreon.com/AVRant podcast to sign up there to be one of our supporters, and we will randomly pick you at the beginning of May, and then he will build it.
Beginning of June. We're in May, Tom.
The beginning of June is what I said.
Yep,
Rob.
I'm sure you did.
Don't put my words in my mouth.
I misheard you. You didn't misspeak. That must be the way.
That's right. That is what my wife says all the time. So, Andrew will be doing that. So please sign up at patreon.com/AVRant podcast. We want to thank our listeners of the week, including Rafael and Jason. Raffle?
I'm just going to say Raph and Jason. Yes, thank you very much for the PayPal donations, gentlemen.
And our 112 patrons over at patreon.com.
Definitely. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast. If you'd like to sign up, become a automatic monthly, voluntary subscriber.
Yeah. I want to thank Ash, who provided our 700 artwork, episode 700 artwork. Jason and Fred for shouting us out to SVS, and all of the gratitude from Daryl, Mark, Jonathan, Steve, Carl, Rob, Jason, and Graham.
Indeed. Jason and Fred, thank you for talking us up to SVS. Daryl, Mark, Jonathan, Steve, Carl, Rob, Jason, Graham, and you know what? All of our listeners, I want to say thank you for continuing to support us, sending us well wishes and just notes of gratitude and just hanging in there and listening with us. It's a wonderful community to still keep going, and we enjoy talking about this stuff, so thank you.
All right. For AV Rant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.